going to begin with the reading from Emmett Fox. And the title for May the 9th is Prayer Does Change Things. Prayer does change things. Let us be perfectly clear about this. Prayer does change things. Many people say that prayer is a good thing because it gives us courage and fortitude to meet our troubles. They say that prayer often gets a person out of difficulties simply by giving him self-confidence that he wouldn't otherwise have. Of course, this is not spiritual truth. The fact is that seeing the presence of God where the trouble seems to be does not merely give us courage to meet the trouble, it changes the trouble into harmony. Prayer heals the body by changing the tissues, and it does this by first changing the mind that forms them. Prayer brings man and woman their salvation by changing their nature fundamentally, not by making the best of him or her as he or she is. The body, the environment, and the universe itself is plastic to our thought, and it always reflects our sincere belief. For as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. And that is from Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7.
Once again, without my having checked them at Fox, we find that Fox talks about something that fits in with what we're going to be talking about today. This is our sixth and last week of a series of mini pilgrimages. I don't know how many of you are having the time to do it, but the idea was each week we're going to talk about one of the 6 Quaker testimonies. A testimony is a statement of belief for right life action, right spiritual action. We've so far covered simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and now we're going to talk about spiritual stewardship. So as I was researching this, I realized that there's really 2 different elements of stewardship. There's one that everybody thinks of and one that, frankly, not even I was giving that much thought to. There is the stewardship of on the earth plane, that which the divine has given us here. And, the ecology movement, for instance, would be an example of seeking to be a good steward. But there's also stewardship on the spiritual plane. And I went to various authorities looking for definitions that cover one or the other. And I'm going to run some definitions and discussions by you so you can see how they're different, but they also intertwine. Richard Rohr, the Franciscan who seems to parallel at least my beliefs a lot, talks about it this way. Our unique little bit of heaven is installed by the manufacturer within the product at the beginning. Now, this parallels the Quaker belief that there's that spark of God that God puts in every single one of us. When we come into this world, we're carrying the spark of God. Rohr goes on to say, we are given a span of years to discover it, to choose it, to live our own destiny to the full. If we do not, our true self may never be offered again in our own unique form, which is why almost all religious traditions present the subject with strong words like heaven and hell. In other words, the discovery of our soul is crucial and is of pressing importance for each of us and for the world. We cannot make or create our souls. We just grow them up. He goes on to say, we are the clumsy stewards of our own souls. And those of you who've been with us a while know that I keep talking about the fact that part of our job here on this earth is to accomplish an ever greater approximation in ourselves of pure divine love. He says, much of our work is learning how to stay out of the way of the natural growing and awakening. We need to unlearn a lot to get back to that foundational life. And this mirrors what Quakerism says and what Lift on Therapy says, that we come into the world innocent, and then our experience in this world claws away and reduces that total innocence that we have. He says, life is indeed momentous, created by accumulated moments in which the deeper I is slowly revealed when we are ready to see it. And that is our inner blueprint, the inner blueprint that our soul is following, seeking to follow as part of the way of following God. A woman, a writer from Ashbury Theological Seminary, said something similar. We are clumsy stewards of our lives and clumsy makers of prayers. We interact thoughtlessly with others and with God. Maybe the first steps toward being better stewards of ourselves is to welcome God and others into honest interaction with us, and interactions that are not self-protective or controlling. Then I came across another Franciscan, Father Justin Belitz, who has a writing where he talks about matriarchal and patriarchal models of religion. And I'll do a talk about this whole thing because it's quite interesting. His point is that the patriarchal is the one where man is dominant. And there are quotes in the Bible for the, highlighted from the patriarchal position, that man is supposed to have dominion over all of nature. Man is supposed to rule over all of nature. And of course, there are those in the conservative religion outlook who think that man is supposed to rule over women and children too. Whereas the matriarchal model carries the understanding or the realization that all of creation is one. That our task is not to control the universe, which is impossible, but to work with the universe toward universal love and peace. And Father Bailey says, this is the challenge that Jesus gave us in this matriarchal model. He goes on to say, in the matriarchal model, everyone and everything, notice everything, has equal status. Women, the poor, widows, the sick, animals, all of nature, people of color, lesbians, bisexual, transsexual, criminals, drug addicts, every bit of the being that God has created is equal. That reminds me of the Lutheran Church of Sinners and of All Sinners and Saints in Denver, I believe it was, which specifically opened its doors to welcome everyone, including those who were criminals, drug addicts, drug dealers, because all are part of the divine. So here we're talking about our spiritual walk and being willing to grow it into something broader and more encompassing, deeper for us, more connected within us and the divine, but also more connected with God's total universe. And the Quakers, in their definition of stewardship, tend to overlook the spiritual. And if you're curious about why that is, you can talk to me, afterwards. But one definition is good stewardship means taking care of what has been given, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us and for future generations. Quakers strive to use their gifts in accordance with their beliefs. There's another writing that suggests that there are four basic principles for what they call biblical stewardship. And here I'm going to include both the personal stewardship of ourselves and our spiritual walk with stewardship of all of God's creation. First of all is, it's related, the principle of ownership. And the brief explanation is, in the beginning, and this is the biblical beginning, please understand, the Christian biblical beginning. God creates everything and puts Adam in the garden to work on it and to take care of it. It is clear that humans were created to work, and that work is the stewardship of all the creation that God has given humankind. God owns everything, and we are simply managers and administrators. Then there's the principle of responsibility. Although God gives us all things richly to enjoy, nothing is ours. Nothing really belongs to us. God owns everything, and we are responsible for how we treat it and what we do with it. Then there's the principle of accountability. We are accountable to the divine for our use of that which the divine has given us. And I'll extend it a bit. We are accountable to other fellow humans, other fellow beings on this earth, to how we treat and what we do with that which God has given us on this earth. And then there's the principle of reward. The failure outlook is you expect to get something wonderful for taking good care of God's creation, as opposed to accepting that it is our responsibility. God has already given us the gift of all this and the gift of the spark of God within us. And we have the responsibility to take care of it. Not, well, I'll take care of it if you give me something really nice. And I can recall talking with someone, it's long enough ago, I don't remember who was talking about how upset they were because they were doing really good things for the earth and God wasn't blessing them enough. Well, that's not stewardship. That's transactional. I'll do this, you do that. As opposed to, God, you have been so good to me, to us, to give us all this, to give me you inside me. And I'll do my best to honor it. That's where we need to be. I'll do my best to honor it, to come closer to serving you, to becoming more like you. Ultimately, the goal is, in my understanding, to go home and be with you. There was an interesting statement from the Catholic Diocese of Charleston. The stewardship way of life is the grateful response of a disciple who recognizes and receives God's gifts and shares these gifts in love of God with neighbors. Share these gifts. It brings me to sort of the concept of the garden. We have been given this earth. We have been given this body as plots of land with seeds installed. And our job is now to tend the garden. Give thanks for what's already there. Give thanks for the opportunity to become better gardeners, to learn to become better gardeners, to give thanks to that which teaches us to become better gardeners. This is what we're called to. This is what inherently is part of our walk. So when you are a gardener in the spiritual walk, spiritual stewardship of the garden, you need to be a careful gardener, a caring gardener. You need to fertilize your garden. And I'm talking both the internal and the external With ideas, you fertilize it. With prayer, you must nurture your garden, gain understanding of what it needs through contemplation. You must take right action to help the garden grow. Does it need water? Spiritual water, real water. Does it need me to care more carefully for that in the physical realm that I have been given? Do I need to be composting if we're taking it down to a real macro level? You need to prune away that within you which conflicts with being a good steward. Oh, I'm nothing if I don't have a Cadillac. Needs to be pruned away. Rejoice in the good and know you are walking the best you can to help that good become ever greater and ever more impactful in this earth. So now let's take a look at some questions you might think of during this week in your meditation time. First, some general questions, and then we'll go through the wheel of life. So, is my life being lived congruently to the tenets of spiritual stewardship? Or am I off the path? Do I work toward a common good, a shared good in my spiritual walk? A shared good for all humans, a shared good for all beings at all of God's earth. And I remind you what the Peace Pilgrim once said. As I recall, she said she was 16 and walking through the woods, and it was her first great revelation. Oh, this rock is God, and that tree is God, and that bird up there is God too. Are you keeping that in mind and responding to that? So now let's look at the wheel of life and some questions for each part of the wheel. For the family side, am I nurturing an atmosphere of equal love, equal welcome and acceptance within my family unit, whether blood family or intentional family? Am I a good example to my family of stewarding my spiritual growth? Am I a good example to my family of careful stewardship of all on this earth and all that exists on this earth? Financially, am I a good gardener of my finances? Think of all the temptations presented to us to be ill gardeners, poor gardeners. That's the way of the world, but it isn't necessarily the way of spiritual stewardship. Do I work to assure that the money I expend avoids supporting organizations which create do I work to assure that the money I spend avoids supporting organizations which create damage to others' spiritual growth and or the well-being of the planet Earth and its residents? Do I avoid funding organizations which support toxic messages which work against divine love and care for self and earth? Now that's a big one for right now, because we see so many messages that are toxic or seeking to be toxic to the world or to others. We need to be careful if we're walking the stewardship way. How about the physical side of life? Do my physical actions show respect and active caring for the piece of divine being that exists in each of us and in the earth? Do my physical actions encourage others to raise their own quality of spiritual awareness and spiritual stewardship of self and earth? Do my actions show that I always seek to improve my own habit of caring stewardship for all of God's creation? interpersonal relationships? Am I a good example to others of being a good gardener of my spiritual growth? Am I a good example to others of being a good gardener for all of God's beings and creation? Do I accept and respect the different approach to stewardship that others may have, so long as it does reflect divine love and care for all aspects of God's creation? In other words, we want to stay away from judgmental of, I'm doing it more okay than you are. Remember, all of us are on different spiritual paths. We're at different spots in our spiritual walk. But there is a clear difference between doing your best to work in divine love as a divine gardener and intentionally seeking to poison the atmosphere, to poison others, whether emotionally or physically. Do I have the courage to hold others up to the light, to speak truth to power about good stewardship when I see abusive anti-stewardship behavior occurring? This is a basic Quaker tenet: speaking truth to power fearlessly and allowing the divine within us to guide our speech. How about our spiritual walk? In what ways do I support others in improving their stewardship, their own personal spiritual growth? And in a sense, it might be, in what ways do I support others in learning how to be good spiritual stewardship gardeners? Do I actively seek to strengthen my stewardship of my own spiritual growth so that I can be my own spiritual rock while stewarding other pieces and beings of the divine? Because your spiritual growth ultimately gives you a stronger and stronger anchor in truth. And living in truth is one of the core things we should be seeking to do. Have I the spiritual and personal courage to stand unswayed from my spiritual truth about living good stewardship because others around me may believe or feel otherwise? I read, I think it was this morning, that in Texas or one of the states, maybe it's Oklahoma, they're about to outlaw solar energy and wind energy because it might reduce some of their income from oil and gas. That's a place where you might want to stand unswayed. Do I remain tender to messages and guidance from the spirit world, which can help me build and maintain my personal spiritual stewardship, and by extension, build and maintain my best possible stewardship of all of God's creation? How about career? At my work, do I communicate an attitude of good stewardship to fellow workers and to those we serve? Do my work actions support an increase of good stewardship attitudes and actions among those with whom I work? Do my work actions and words support an increase of good stewardship attitudes and actions within the organization I serve? Notice the people I work with and the organization, two separate entities, because organizations have their own belief pattern and life script as well. What about the emotional aspect of your life? Am I able to maintain an attitude of good stewardship toward myself, others, and the earth, even during emotionally stressing and upsetting times? Have I built a sufficiently strong spiritual stewardship habit? Notice that, a spiritual stewardship habit, so that I have a good anchor for my emotional stability in times of stress. And then finally, leadership. Do I lead and encourage others to understand the importance of integrating spiritual stewardship for their personal walk and for all the earth? Do I provide stewarding support to others to help them build their own stewardship habits? Now, bear in mind, leadership needn't be visibly active, standing on a step and orating or anything like that. For many Quakers, and for many Amish too, the leadership is letting people see you doing right action. Let me say that again, because to me, it's really important. Good leadership is often simply living and doing right action, carrying stewardship for yourself that people will witness just by who you are, carrying stewardship of the earth and its denizens that others can witness and understand how important it is. And a closing thought, I do not know where I came across this. The same Spirit that was in Christ Jesus, and I refer you here to Father Rohr's cosmic Christ. It does not have to be a Christian Christ, because Christ has come to many peoples in many forms, associated with many faiths, but always with the same message. So I'm going to reread it using cosmic Christ this time. The same Spirit that was in the cosmic Christ, of whom one is Christ Jesus, is in all of us. Knowledge of this truth frees us to be ever better stewards of our growth in divine love for all the earth, including other humans and our own selves. I'm going to say this one more time because it seems a fitting way to set our brains going. The same Spirit that was in Christ is in all of us. Knowledge of this truth frees us to be ever better stewards of our growth in divine love for all the earth, including other humans and our own selves.